And the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good evening. It's been day 2 of Harry telling his truth. Yes, his truth in the High Court. It just appears many of the things he believes to be true perhaps are not. I think it's been rather a humiliation. I'll be debating tonight. Do we now feel just a little bit of sympathy for Prince Harry? But before that, and much else, let's get the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Nigel, thank you, and good evening to you. The top story from the GB newsroom. As you've been hearing, the Duke of Sussex has left the High Court in London after his second day on the witness stand, giving evidence in his privacy case against Mirror Group newspapers. Prince Harry said today he believes journalists used unlawful techniques to get stories about him, including placing a tracking device on the car of his ex-girlfriend Chelsea Davy. He also claimed in court that journalists went to extreme lengths to cover up their alleged phone hacking. The publisher denies any wrongdoing. Well, away from the High Court and to the United States, where the Prime Minister has been visiting Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia today to lay a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. It's ahead of his 4th meeting with the US President at the White House tomorrow. During talks with Joe Biden, Rishi Sunak's expected to reaffirm Western support for Ukraine, as well as addressing the growing threat from China, climate change and the regulation of AI. Football, and 16 people have been detained by Czech police this afternoon after fans clashed ahead of the Europa Conference League final in Prague. 3 people were said to have been injured when Fiorentina fans attacked West Ham supporters in a bar. Witnesses claim the Italians were armed with chains, belts and buckles. The police officer was also attacked. Videos shared on social media appeared to show fans throwing cafe chairs in the street. Downing Street says humanitarian aid to Ukraine will be diverted to the area directly affected by the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. Tens of thousands of people have had to be evacuated from their homes in and around Russian-controlled Kherson, with rising water levels expected to peak later. The head of the UN's aid programme has warned of grave and far-reaching humanitarian consequences for southern Ukraine following the collapse of the dam yesterday. Ukraine and Russia are accusing each other of being responsible for blowing it up in an act of wartime sabotage. A Romanian people trafficker has been jailed for his part in an operation to smuggle dozens of Afghan nationals into the UK inside coffin-sized wooden boxes. Adrian Constantine was extradited back to the UK to stand trial after fleeing the country. He was sentenced to 3 years and 2 months in prison at Birmingham Crown Court today after pleading guilty to conspiracy to assist unlawful immigration. 35 Afghans, including children as young as 2 and a person with physical disabilities, were screwed into purpose-built hides and smuggled into the UK in the back of vans. And lastly, Pope Francis is recovering from a 3-hour-long operation on an abdominal hernia. The Vatican said there were no complications during the surgery and that the pontiff will stay in hospital for several days to recover. The 86-year-old suffered a number of medical setbacks recently, including spending 5 days in hospital in March with a lung infection. 2 years ago, he had surgery on his intestine. You're up to date on TV, online, DAB+ radio and the TuneIn app. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Until the Oprah Winfrey interview, I'd never heard of the concept of your truth. Because, you see, it's all come from California, of course, and Harry's been in court for the last 2 days telling his truth. This very concept is based on feelings rather than objective facts. And when it came to facts, he wasn't really very good because he said, I don't know 18 times today. He said, I don't remember 9 times today. You would have thought the chap might have learnt his brief, but clearly not. There was a huge amount of conversation around Chelsea Davy, a woman that he was seeing for 7 years. He said the whole thing was doomed from the start because of the tabloid press. And I thought there was a very interesting psychology behind all of that. I wonder, though, do we now, after this humiliation, do we sympathise with Prince Harry? Give me your thoughts, farage@gbnews.com. Have to say, my views have moved from anger at him for betraying everything, his grandmother, his regiment. I actually now feel rather sorry for him. I feel after these last 2 days he looks a rather pitiful figure because evidence he has produced none. I'm joined by Tom Bauer, royal biographer and author of Revenge, Meghan, Harry and the War Between the Windsors and the Rebel Prince. Tom, it's not been a great 2 days for Prince Harry, has it?
Well, no, but it could never have been, because he really has become the vehicle for Hugh Grant and the hacked-off group, who have really captured him and used him to advance their cause. And his misfortune is not only that he's not very intelligent, but he hasn't had independent legal advice, who would have warned him that what he's getting into is not exactly what is on the tin presented by Hugh Grant.
But he's made millions with Netflix. He's made millions with the book. I mean, it's not as if he hasn't got the cash to get independent legal advice.
Well, that's exactly why they used him, because in all the other cases of hacking, the people didn't have the money to risk of £1 million fees to do the case. Harry has got the money, and he's got the purpose. He's motivated. So when Sherborne, the lawyer, the smear merchant lawyer, found Harry in the south of France, he was tapping at a willing accomplice to his plan, which was always to attack the media with a famous person. So they got Harry, put him into court, and now he's exposed himself as somebody who really doesn't, as you say, know his own argument.
Well, I mean, there were 33 articles that the judge had selected to be discussed. I'm not even sure he'd read the articles again thoroughly. He seemed to have little knowledge of many of them. I mean, I thought the whole thing was, frankly, embarrassing, on the point of being humiliating. The Chelsea Davy point that I just mentioned in the introduction, very interesting. There was a lot on Chelsea Davy, his feelings that it was doomed from the start. I don't know, perhaps I'm getting this wrong. I almost thought what he was saying is, I wish I'd married Chelsea Davy.
Well, I think the point is, which I wrote about in my book as well, she was an ideal woman for him. She was young, very pretty, English, lived in Southern Africa, but still very much British, and they had a lot of fun together. But it always understood that she tired of him because he was manic depressive. He was very insecure. He was very moody. And therefore, that's why they had the trial separations and things like that. So he may look back on it and think that would have been an easy option. But I think he's happy in California myself. He likes paddling in the Pacific. It would have been, at least she would have fitted in. She would have been very, very happy to be the Duchess of Sussex.
Yeah.
She would not have caused the endless problems that Meghan has caused and sought to sort of sabotage the royal family for her own purpose.
What he was unable to do was to produce any real factual evidence, any killer blow of any kind at all. It started in the latter part of today. That will go on through tomorrow and maybe the day after. And this, of course, is Sherborne, who you mentioned earlier, Mr. Sherborne, who is the barrister representing Harry. Does he have anything up his sleeve, do you think, that will embarrass the Mirror Group?
No, which is the reason why the Mirror Group is fighting the case, because they don't think Sherborne has got the ammunition. That's why they paid out to all the other people, because the other people would want to throw it in, but they don't want on Harry. No, but his whole point is, it's all inference. How could you have got this information without? It's a whole smear campaign.
He may be right.
Well, the point is, you see, Nigel, that the British judges have always found in favour of the royal family. Whatever, as they did with Meghan. It was outrageous that Meghan, against the Mail, was able to win, although she had signed an inaccurate statement. And it didn't even go to trial. They gave it to Meghan without a trial. The 3 judges in the appeal court. Now, he may well, this judge, they decide, I've got to give it again to the royal family. I'm not going to embarrass them.
But how?
Well, because the idea that the facts and the truth matter to a judge is equally bizarre.
Well, I think we demand VAR.
We're into Alice in Wonderland.
We really are.
But you know, the thing about Harry is he is convinced he's right. I mean, he cannot understand that there is a public interest, as the lawyer for the Mirror said to him, if he doesn't pass an exam and still gets into Sandhurst. He doesn't think the public should know that, because he should protect his own privacy and, on the other hand, earn millions by invading other people's privacy. That's the contradiction.
Final thought, Tom Bower. Do you sympathise with Harry at all?
Not at all. Not at all. Here is a man of unbelievable privilege, of unbelievable good fortune of having been a prince and never had to worry about money and all the rest of it. And yes, his mother died, but you know, millions of men and women have gone through life with endless complications and horror stories. And so, yes, it was tough for him, but you know, he's now 38, he should have grown up, and I think he is just an utterly spoilt brat, frankly.
Tom Bower, thank you. Well, that was Hard Man Bower. Absolutely no mistaking his words. He feels no sympathy for Harry whatsoever. I just think the whole thing is very, very sad. I think he's really humiliated himself over the course of the last couple of days, and forever after. You know, he said he always hated being called the Thicko Prince. And Tom referred there to perhaps he got into Sandhurst on terms that others wouldn't. We've heard he had special help at Eton. Said he really hated being called Thicko. I do wonder, Michael Cole, former BBC royal correspondent, whether he hasn't perhaps confirmed it over the course of the last 2 days. It sounds harsh, but...
If we can rework an old wartime phrase, was his journey really necessary? What has he achieved? If the purpose was to come here and prove that there was criminality at the Daily Mirror, a respected, well-established, 100-years-old newspaper company, and that its journalists and its editors and maybe even its proprietors were guilty of criminality, felonies, which would send them to jail for a considerable amount of time, then you've got to have evidence for that.
And there's none.
No. There are 31 stories were cited between 12 and 26 years ago, which Harry has maintained were brought about by illicit means, by illegal means. His privacy was invaded and it was illegal, it was a criminal act. Well, when you're going into the Colosseum, into the arena, you've got to go well armed because you're accusing men and women who probably feel that they're good citizens in a well-established trade, which is important to the democracy of this country, who pay their taxes, who are nice to their children, and who live a God-fearing life, and you're accusing them of criminality. Yeah. It's serious business.
No, it is. It is.
And if you're going to say that, you're going to have to be sure of yourself. And at the end of an ordeal, and it was an ordeal, a different sort of ordeal than sitting in the front seat of an Apache attack helicopter, but it was an ordeal for 8 hours. His barrister said to him, you know, how did you feel about it? Meaning...
I'm going to stop you there.
OK.
I'm going to stop you there. There's a reason. There's a good reason, because Dan Wootton tonight is going to go into this in depth, and he's got an actor to play Prince Harry. So I want you to watch Dan Wootton tonight. And the very, very point that Michael Cole just made, this is what you'll see later on with Dan Wootton.
You've been sat in the witness box for over a day and a half. You've had to go through these articles and answer questions in a very public courtroom, knowing the media is watching. How has that made you feel?
It's a lot.
So
he was emotionally choked up.
Well, was he? Or was it all pre-managed and staged?
Interesting.
Come on. Come on. Don't be such a softie.
Do you think he's pulling the wool over my eyes?
He's been through 8 hours of interrogation. Yeah. He then gets his own barrister to come on for the last little bit. That question's teed up and he starts blubbing. I mean, the whole thing's a complete sham.
Well, let's just take one little nugget of this. The thing that I thought was most interesting today, because it did involve him, it was said, or he said, that he discovered a tracking device on the car of Chelsea Davy, his longtime girlfriend, and another one on a car of a friend of his who was close to him. And in that testimony, he named the person who put those bugs on those cars. I'm not going to name them because, although it's privileged, the man may be entirely innocent, and I don't want to libel him in that sense. Although it wouldn't be libel because it's privileged, but let's keep him out of it. Now, if you're going to make that allegation, how can you not then go on and prove that it was the Mirror that procured that act? That's a criminal act. On the face of it, it's a criminal act. So where is the connection between the Mirror, that action, and a story that appeared in the paper? Now, supposition, suspicion, allegation, accusation, none of these are proof. And this is a case which will turn on the proof, the evidence that is laid before the judge. It's a civil case. It decided on the balance of probabilities. Was it more likely or was it less likely that this happened? And I'm sure Mr. Justice Fancourt will bend over backwards to make sure he gets an absolutely fair ride, as he should do. But he can only act, the judge, on the evidence that's been adduced.
Yeah, that's what I think. And a final thought, Michael Cole. Do you feel any sympathy for Prince Harry?
I do. I do. I'll tell you why. Because about 200 yards in that direction is the Lindo wing of St Mary's Church, St Mary's Hospital. And he came out of that as a newborn baby, his mother looking very beautiful with her hair done and all dressed in red. Maybe that was a clue. His red hair and so on. And he's been under scrutiny his whole life. He didn't enjoy it as a child. He let his emotions show. And his mother was taken for him in the most terrible and cruel circumstances when he was 12 years old. He's carrying that with him. He's never shed it. He is prey to that anger and that anxiety and that fury. It's all genuine, of course. The hurt is raw and it's real. And I know what Tom said, at 38 years old, he's got to grow up and be mature. But some people are better at coping with misfortune and tragedy than others. I wouldn't condemn him for that. But I do think very, very strongly that he should have taken proper and good advice. Really do. Because if you're going to say this thing, I get the feeling, and I regret it, that he hasn't been well prepared or he hasn't been well advised.
Well, yes, but he is 38. And if Tom is right, that Hugh Grant's sort of talked him into it, I don't know. It's all just very sad. Michael Cole, thank you very much indeed. I want to know your thoughts, folks. Do you have some sympathy for Prince Harry? Farage at gbnews.com. In a moment, a big report, a big survey, 75 years on, from Windrush, which says the ethnic minorities living in Britain believe this is by far the best and most tolerant country in the whole of the Western world. Why do we keep beating ourselves up? All of that in a couple of minutes.
Coming up, brace yourself for day 2 of Harry's High Court testimony as we continue our exclusive coverage of his assault on the British Free Press. Expect more bombshells like this using our Harry.
The phrase two-faced may have come from a voicemail. That's how I've always seen him. I've never smoked a joint in that pub or in my father's house.
So join me, Samantha Markle, Lady Colin Campbell and Jim Davidson for Harry's Evidence, The Verdict, Day 2, coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m, only on GB News.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank. My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I asked you, do we sympathise with Prince Harry? Elle says, absolutely yes. The press influence minds with no regard for respecting privacy. They happily lie and then print a tiny apology. Well, I've got to tell you, there is some truth in that. Yes, you get a big front page story that's not right, and then the apology is in the bottom of page 2, and it's about that big. That is true, but that's what you have to live with as a public figure and a free press, I'm afraid, and it's always been like that. Ryan says, not in the slightest. I sympathise with the judge who has to suffer Harry's woke droning voice. That's a bit rough, Ryan. And one viewer says, I'm actually fed up with hearing about Harry. There must be more important things to report on, which are actually relevant to our lives. All right, on that point, I'm going to introduce Femi Nylander, political campaign and activist. Welcome to the programme. British Future think tank report out today a survey of ethnic minorities in Britain, and 80% said they'd rather live in the United Kingdom. They thought it was the best place to live of all Western countries. And I just thought, isn't that, on the face of it, a bit of good news?
I mean, not necessarily. Like, firstly, I mean, you yourself talk a lot about migration. You'll find that migrants that come from countries that are in the English-speaking world, because England was a country that colonised them, would prefer to come to England for a simple logistical fact of the fact that if they go to Spain or if they go to Greece, they're not going to understand what's going on. So probably a lot of people are responding, it's better for me.
No, I accept the language, of course, is good. But the specific question was about attitudes to different races, right? And about feeling comfortable. I've spent years of my life working in Europe, and I definitely think this is the most open-minded country of any country in Europe.
Now, I'm not going to defend other European countries, but I'm also not going to defend the UK. As you yourself are a big criticiser of the idea that the UK forms a part of Europe, or forms a part of the European Union, or at least have been historically.
They are different.
They're different things, but the UK is a part of Europe, and the UK is a part of the European continent.
No, we're not. We're an island.
Well, you're an island.
Yeah, go on.
But then Japan, then Japan isn't part of Asia with that logic.
Well, it's not part of China. It's not part of China, that's for certain.
But it is part of Asia. And the UK shares, with a lot of other European countries, a very dark history. The UK was a colonial country. Spain was a colonial country. France was a colonial country. Germany was a colonial country, as was Belgium. Europe has a colonial history. Spain, Portugal, France, all engaged in the slave trade, the UK engaged in the slave trade. All of these dark parts of the European history, which have led to attitudes of racism and prejudice and xenophobia.
And there are dark parts of African history as well, aren't there?
There are dark parts of African history.
There were plenty of African slave traders actually selling the slaves.
There were some African slave traders.
No. I mean, this is. There were also,
like,
of course.
This is a dead argument at the end of the day.
Well, hang on. If you want to have that argument.
If you give me your son on a plate and I do something dodgy with him, then you can't defend yourself saying, oh, well,
the Barbary pirates. The Barbary pirates from North Africa took nearly 1 million white slaves from the West Coast to the British.
How many black slaves were trafficked across the Atlantic?
Two wrongs don't make a right. But this report's about where we are today, right?
But this report is a survey. I mean, do we know anything about this think tank? Can you tell me anything about this think tank?
They're a pretty neutral think tank, British Future. They're not left. They're
what's their background?
They're looking into social attitudes.
But what's their background? What gives them any credibility?
Well, it's a poll conducted by Focal Data, who are a member of the British Polling Council, right? So that's the point to get. The point to hoist on board is this has been done by a legitimate polling company. Now, what the poll also says is that many members of the ethnic communities believe there is some form of discrimination in the country today. And so I'm being balanced with this.
Yep.
That's what they say. All I'm saying to you, Femi, is I just get this narrative too often that somehow, I think our schools are teaching it, that somehow this country is uniquely evil. And actually,
it's not uniquely evil. Europe has a history. Look at Germany, Alternative for Deutschland, becoming the second biggest party in the country. Look at France and Marine Le Pen. Europe, as a continent, has a very dark relationship to other parts of the world, because Europe, being one of the wealthier parts of the world, and you mentioned the West as an entity, that includes the United States, that includes Australia, New Zealand, but we talk about migration here. We talk about sending back all of the people. Like, are the indigenous people we talk about the indigenous Brits. Are the indigenous people of New Zealand white? Are the indigenous people of America white? No, because they travel around the world and they set up other places and people move. And at the end of the day, if we have this concept of the West, Of course, there are going to be people in Britain who say that it's nicer to be in Britain than in France or in Germany, but it's not necessarily a good thing to say we're better than another country that also has racist attitudes. We're better than another country that also hates migrants. We're better than another country that also...
Are you suggesting that the AfD? Are you suggesting that the National Rally in France? Are you suggesting that the Brothers of Italy? Are you suggesting these are all racist parties?
Oh, of course. I mean, these parties generally, they're xenophobic parties. They're parties that deny the history of their own countries and deny the relationship that their countries have to other parts of the world in terms of colonialism, in terms of...
I don't think any German political party denies its awful history.
Oh, no, they do. They don't deny the Holocaust, which happened in Europe. Most of them would have nothing to do with talking about Namibia and the Herero massacre in Namibia. Parts of it, their history.
What would you like to see happen?
The Holocaust is one dark part of German history.
What would you like to see
One dark part of Germany.
What would you like to see happen?
What would I like to see happen? Across Europe or in the UK? In general? In the UK, I'd like to see a huge shift in our understanding of our past, for one.
What, and be proud that we stamped out slavery, you mean?
Be proud that we stamped out slavery.
And we did.
If Jimmy Savile stops himself doing kiddly fiddling, do you get to say that he never did it in the past?
Do you not acknowledge the role...
out slavery. The first country to get rid of slavery was Haiti. And you know how they did it? Do you know how they did it? Do you know?
I have no idea.
You have no idea about that history, about Haiti.
I'm not an expert on Haiti,
literally having a revolution and chopping off the slave masters' heads. Because they were enslaving them, and there was a violent revolution to get rid of slavery in Haiti. And there was a violent revolution to get rid of slavery in Haiti.
Do you acknowledge...
William Wilberforce coming along and singing Amazing Grace is not the first time we got rid of
Do you acknowledge the role...
slave trade.
Do you acknowledge the role of the Royal Navy over decades in stamping out the slave trade? And this affected millions of people.
Let me tell you a bit about it. First of all, they got rid of the slave trade. They didn't get rid of slavery. Firstly, they initially... Let me respond to your...
It's a very simple question. We're out of time. Do you acknowledge...
Do I acknowledge...
the extraordinary role that the Royal Navy played in stamping out slavery?
I think that the ending of slavery was largely an economic decision in terms of the UK. Also, I think that they abolished the slave trade. They didn't even abolish slavery. For a while, we weren't allowed to sail on the waters. It's nonsense, isn't it, for me to say that I have stopped doing something and I should be proud of it when I led one of the most barbarous...
And we then stopped others doing it.
One of the most barbarous things in human history.
Do you like this country?
The slave trade. Do I like Britain? Oh, I love loads of Britain. Loads of parts of Britain.
Do you like this country?
Loads of part of Britain I don't like.
Do you like this country?
Do I like this country? I like parts of Britain. I like Britain as a thriving, bubbling, multicultural centre of creativity and of diversity. I don't like the parts of Britain that are reactionary, xenophobic, anti-migrant, anti-people, and completely delusional about British past.
And you don't like our history?
Completely delusional about
and you don't like our history?
Oh, I like parts of British history. I don't like most of British history.
And there's no country in the world where you'd like all the history.
Oh, no.
All I will say to you at the conclusion of this is, I think it's disappointing. Yes, there are problems. Yes, of course, our history with everybody else's is far from perfect. It's disappointing.
Did every country in the world have an empire that spanned half of the globe?
And you name me an empire in the history of humankind that has now formed a commonwealth of over 50 countries.
What Commonwealth?
And new ones joining...
What Commonwealth? They're leaving. Jamaica wants to leave.
No.
They're leaving because they don't want Charles to be their king, because they've got nothing to do with the UK.
They are not
apart from the fact that the UK were their colonial overlords.
Actually,
they are leaving. They don't want Charles on their £5 notes. They don't want Charles on their £10 notes. They don't want you anymore.
You might learn something.
The Commonwealth doesn't want you anymore, Nigel.
Countries like Mozambique, that were never even part of the British Empire, are now joining the Commonwealth. Fact.
Nonsense.
In a moment,
Nigel.
Rishi Sunak is over in the USA. He says he wants to forge an economic alliance with Joe Biden. But I wonder, can he really achieve that? Because Joe Biden doesn't like the UK either.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I have walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better.
Crop failures, famine, war, suffering on a scale completely unimaginable.
We are putting the cart before the horse. As Charles I said at the scaffold, he was the true defender of liberty.
Yeah, I've completely derailed the conversation.
Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Yes, Rishi Sunak is in Washington. He's there, of course, to meet the US President Joe Biden. He wants to forge a closer economic alliance. Well, I'm joined down the line from Washington, D.C. by Niall Gardner, former aide to Margaret Thatcher and director of the Margaret Thatcher Centre for Freedom at the Heritage Foundation. Niall, it's great to have you today. You guys have been trying to take Prince Harry. He's been in court here, but you've been taking him to task in America because you want to see what he said on his visa form. How are you getting on with the American legal process?
Well, Nigel, thanks very much for having me on the show today. It's great to see you. And as you mentioned, we have basically taken the Department of Homeland Security in the United States to federal court to release the immigration records of Prince Harry. We believe there's a strong public interest in the release of those records, especially in light of Harry's admission of widespread illegal drug use in his book Spare. And so we want to establish whether or not Harry was honest in terms of his application and also whether he was given any preferential treatment. There was a court hearing yesterday in the District of Columbia Federal Court presided over by a federal judge. He has ordered the Department of Homeland Security to issue a decision by Tuesday next week on whether or not they will release the records. If they do not release the records, then there will likely be further hearings. And ultimately, a federal judge will decide on whether or not those records will be released. But I think a very positive hearing yesterday. We're fighting to win this legal case. We're fighting to hold the Biden administration to account here and calling for transparency and accountability.
Yeah. OK, it'd be very interesting to see what the outcome of it is, and a very big initiative from the Heritage Foundation. Now, Rishi Sunak has gone to meet what I think is perhaps the most anti-British US president in many, many years to talk about forging a close economic alliance. But in the absence of a free trade agreement, which the Biden administration seems hell-bent on not doing, is, on the economics of this, Rishi, frankly, wasting his time.
Well, it's actually emerged, I think, over the last hour or so here in Washington that Rishi Sunak is not going to be pushing the issue of a US-UK trade deal. And that is in large part because Joe Biden's been very hostile towards Britain. As you say, I mean, he has been, I think, the most British US president of modern times here. Biden is no friend of Great Britain. He has treated Britain in an appalling fashion. Biden is anti-Brexit, he's pro-EU. He is a sneering and arrogant left-wing president, actually, who has undermined the US-UK special relationship. I do think, though, it's a huge shame that Sunak is not pushing forward, actually, with a US-UK trade deal, because many members of Congress, many US senators fully support a trade deal with the United Kingdom. Rishi Sunak should be standing up to Joe Biden. He shouldn't be demonstrating any sign of weakness. He shouldn't be kowtowing to the Biden White House here. The Prime Minister should be standing up for Britain on the world stage. It's in Britain's interest to have a trade deal with the United States. There's tremendous support in the US Congress. Sunak should raise the issue, but
I agree.
According to reports here, he's dropped the idea.
Niall, thanks for that up-to-the-minute assessment of what is going on between the UK Prime Minister and the US President, and it's all really rather disappointing. The What the Farage moment. You know, you'll hear all the time, isn't it wonderful, isn't it marvellous that the NHS is staffed by so many foreign people? And indeed, many of them are quite wonderful, no question. But think about this. Last year, 1,200 nurses joined the NHS from Ghana. Now, I can quite understand why, because the salary in the UK is 7 times that of Ghana. But the impact of this on Ghana is devastating. And direct quotes and reports from health officials in Ghana saying that because of a lack of nurses, more people in Ghana are dying. So rather than saying, isn't it wonderful that we take nurses and doctors from much poorer parts of the world, maybe we should think we could do those parts of the world a favour by training more of our own people. Now, Frankie Boyle, left-wing comedian, did a show on Channel 4. It was very much anti-royal, but I think it went too far. Take a listen to this, and it was just before the coronation.
I didn't make any jokes when the Queen died. I maintained a strict silence as I tried to sneak back out of her bedroom.
Outspoken comedian Frankie Boyle isn't the greatest fan of the British monarchy.
Henry VIII was a keen hunter, and judging from his portraits, he mainly hunted cheese.
And in his own very unique way,
The British monarchy appear like animals in a zoo that's fallen on hard times.
he's going to show us why he'd like to say farewell to them once and for all.
To find out about the future of the monarchy, we must look back at their past. So let's get out in the streets and raise a bottle to them, filled with petrol and a burning rag.
Well, I think that's absolutely disgusting. And you can take the mickey out of Queen Victoria if you want to, although it's all part, I think, of that anti-British narrative that I was discussing just a few moments ago with Femi. But to suggest, let us effectively get a petrol bomb and bomb the monarchy, I think it's absolutely way out of order. I think it's insightful. I think if anybody on GB News said it, they would be, as opposed to Channel 4, there'd be total and utter uproar. And yet, Ofcom, our regulator, have decided that it's OK. And I don't often criticise the regulator, but I repeat the point. Had that been said by anybody here at GB News, there would have been hell to pay. In a moment, we will talk about dangerous dogs and killer attacks because they're on the increase rapidly and significantly. And since the pandemic, many more of us own dogs. And I'll be joined live in the studio by a Rhodesian Ridgeback.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News. The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Well, dog attacks are on the rise, some of them, of course, fatal. And even today, as we speak, out on the news wires, a woman in East London attacked and dragged to the ground by 3 dogs, screaming, terrified. She's going to be OK. Wayne Davis MP has described an epidemic of killing by dogs. That was said last night. And according to the All-Party Parliamentary Dog Advisory Welfare Group, 18 people have died in dog attacks since 2021. I mean, that genuinely is an alarming figure. There were 20 arrests made last year of people because they had dangerous dogs. And the number of arrests is up, the number of attacks is up, the number of deaths is up. And, of course, the number of dogs is up. And the Daily Mirror have launched a campaign, Time for Action on Dangerous Dogs. And this is on the back of Jack Liss, who was murdered by a dog at the age of 10. It's reached the level where we actually have to have a proper conversation, take this seriously and work out what is happening. Now, I've got 2 guests with me in the studio. I've got Paula O'Sullivan, a canine behaviourist, and I've got Tilly. The Rhodesian Ridgeback, who at the moment is being incredibly well behaved.
Of course.
Paula, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Of course, there have always been problems over the years, but it is this rate of increase that is disturbing. Looking at the numbers, basically, since the pandemic, the number of dogs, and in the old days, we had dog licences. There was a register of dogs. It was 7 and 6 in old money, but there was a register of dogs, and we knew exactly how many dogs there were and how they were categorised. That doesn't exist anymore. So knowing how many dogs are owned by families in the country is more difficult, but it's certainly gone up 10, 15% since the beginning of the pandemic. And I sort of do begin to wonder whether perhaps there are quite a few people who've taken dogs during lockdown who perhaps don't quite know what they're doing.
Well, absolutely. That is the cause of the increase, because there has been a rise of dog ownership in the UK, and unfortunately those dogs and people didn't have access to training classes or socialisation right in the critical stages of development. So we do have a surge in reactivity and aggression as a result of lack of poor socialisation and training due to COVID.
Is the problem here more likely to be the owners than the dogs?
Not always, although, we can't deny that that does happen. But aggression is both genetic and epigenetic, meaning it's environmental too. And it can be very complex. So it can be as a result of previous trauma. It can be due to lack of socialisation during critical periods of development. It can be genetic as well. So I think we really need to look into bottom-level breeding. So going back to licensing and registration.
So you think we should go back to that?
100%.
Yeah, I generally have to say that I hate government and I hate licensing and I hate fees, but I think given these figures, there is actually a logical argument for it. And yeah, for once I'm going to come out on the side of more bureaucracy. It's unusual for me, but I think it does make sense. Then, of course, the debate moves on to breeds. Now, we already, have a ban on the breeding, sale and exchange of pit bull terriers, Japanese tosers. There are 3 or 4 breeds of dogs that we've just decided are simply too dangerous. I think part of this is because of the pounds per square inch that they can bite.
The size and the power, yeah.
The size and the power as well.
But, I mean, I'd like to see the Dangerous Dogs Act move away from breed-specific legislation.
Would you?
Yes, because...
So you'd love to see pit bulls back being wandering around our streets?
Well, that's what I'm saying is aggression is not isolated to any specific breed. Any dog is capable of biting. So we need to tackle the issue from the ground upwards. So... OK, logically, yes.
I get what you're saying. Any dog is capable of biting, but some dogs biting aren't going to hurt very much.
Yes, I agree.
Other dogs biting, because of this PSI that I mentioned earlier, can do huge harm.
More severity. However, if the DDA does its job at tackling this issue from the ground up with responsible breeding, it'll put a stop to all of the backyard breeding and all of the importation of potentially dangerous dogs. And then...
OK, I'm just thinking about this.
Yeah.
I mean, we've heard all sorts of horror stories about puppy farms. We've heard, I mean, lots of stuff we've heard about the dog trade that's been pretty unsavoury. Would registration stop all of that?
I'm glad it wouldn't be my job to put in all the legislation. I'm a clinical behaviourist. But if we were able to do it before, I can't see why we can't do it again. And if we have responsible breeding, it does put a stop to all of the importation.
So how do we enforce responsible breeding?
They should be licensed.
They should be licensed.
Yes, absolutely.
Actually, the truth is, it's even more important that anybody breeding and selling dogs is licensed than those owning them.
Absolutely, yes. So it should be the breeders that are licensed and registered, and then that gives them the potential to vet potential owners and also raise education and awareness on responsible ownership for anyone that takes any of their dogs.
Now, we've got Tilly in the studio.
Yes.
And Tilly is being too well behaved.
She's very relaxed.
Now, Tilly is a Rhodesian Ridgeback.
Yes.
And this is a big, strong, powerful dog.
Equally capable of doing some damage.
Yes.
Yeah, as a pit bull or a...
And they would be a hunting dog in their natural environment?
They were originally bred as hunting dogs, that's right, yeah.
So how do we take a big, powerful dog like Tilly and make it a great pet and a dog that's going to be safe with people elsewhere? How do you do that?
Well, with Tilly, for example, we started off with puppy school, which means good socialisation to environments, people, places, other dogs, right from that critical period of development, which is the first 16 weeks. Now, there's a lot of online puppy training going on, online training resources, and people are opting for that as an easy option rather than going to puppy schools, for example, where it's really important.
So the socialisation really is important.
Very, very important, but not just during that critical stages of development, because it should also be equally as important throughout adolescence and their younger years.
Right.
But critically in those first 16 weeks, yes.
OK. No, listen, that's a valuable conversation, Paula O'Sullivan. Thank you for coming in. Tilly, thank you for coming in. You've behaved much... I mean, of course, I didn't want Tilly to go completely mad, but Tilly has been amazingly good, and thanks for the chat. And, yeah, I have to say, this increase, we don't need hysteria in terms of legislation, but I do think what Paula is saying, particularly about the breeders being licensed, I think does make a huge amount of sense. Now, I've got time for a barrage the Farage. Leah in Bradford has a question for me.
Hi, Nigel. I'm Lee Mayfield. I've been street homeless for a long time. There's a lot of people who are dying on the streets. Can you please explain what everybody's doing about it?
Well, the question there of homelessness and of people dying on the streets. Look, there are more and more people, I'm afraid, being made homeless. The higher rents become, the fewer rental houses there are on the market. And frankly, the lack of social housing is a massive problem. And I'm not going to take a cheap shot at this, but, you know, we are actually housing a huge number of people who are coming into this country illegally, and maybe we should think about our own poor just a little bit more. I've got time for one more. A question from Ben.
Hi, Nigel. I'm Ben. I just wanted to ask about what your opinion is on Klaus Schwab, the Great Reset and the World Economic Forum, really. Not really heard much about it on GB News.
Well, the World Economic Forum. Look, of course the World Economic Forum exists, just as Bilderberg groups and other things existed before. And yes, they do aggressively pursue a globalist agenda. And of course, they're right behind Brussels and the European Union. They seem to care very little for the liberty of the individual. They're right behind the WHO pandemic treaty. And yeah, frankly, I think they are, as the Americans would say, bad dudes. But we have some good eggs at GB News. One of them, of course, is Jacob Rees-Mogg. And I wonder, Jacob, what have you got coming up for us today?
We're going to start with the Prime Minister's visit to the US to see the President Biden, who doesn't much like the UK, and whether he wouldn't be better off staying at home, dealing with lots of the problems that the country faces at the moment. And PMs sometimes find the world stage is great fun when the opinion polls are difficult at home. And then we'll catch up with the Duke of Sussex and what's been going on in that extraordinary trial. Fascinating information that's coming out of it.
Yeah, I mean, he really, you know, it's interesting, isn't it? This sort of concept, my truth. It's all about how he feels, and he's got every right to be aggrieved. I mean, his mother died when he was 12 in awful circumstances. But it almost feels to me, Jacob, we're moving into a world where how you feel seems to matter more than objective facts.
And that can't be right, and it mustn't upset the Constitution. I think the key thing is we defend freedom of the press. And this case is all about limiting, tethering the press, making it more subservient to the rich and famous. And that's very bad constitutional territory.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Tom Bower earlier on was saying effectively he thought Prince Harry was doing the bidding of Hugh Grant and that group that want, you know, we've had Leveson, but they wanted even more controls. Jacob is going to be with you in just a moment. Now, tomorrow, I'm going to be with you from the, you may think this is very appropriate, from the brewing capital of the country. I'm going to be in Burton-on-Trent tomorrow evening doing a Farage at Large. I might just get a chance to visit a brewery before we go on air. And I'm hoping that the weather forecast is going to say it'll be a nice day.
Good evening, Alex Deakin here with your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Changes are on the way, but tomorrow is going to be more of the same. It starts a bit dull and eventually it turns sunny for most, with the eastern side again likely to keep a lot of cloud. Down to the southwest, low pressure is brewing. That will create a bit of a change in the outlook. But for, as I say, tonight and tomorrow, it's more of the same. So the cloud that's been lurking in the east just drifts back further inland as we go through the night. So a fine warm evening for many, but the cloudy and cooler conditions in the east spread back to most areas through the night. Temperatures holding up at 8 to 10 Celsius. A bit warmer than that in the southwest, where it's going to get quite windy, actually. A blustery night across the far southwest of England and parts of the south coast of Wales as well. It will be windy here too during Thursday. For most, it's a grey start tomorrow, but the clouds should break up in most locations from mid-morning onwards. Again, parts of the east coast looking fairly glum, much of northern Scotland as well. Perhaps a sunnier day across parts of East Anglia. Maybe a touch warmer, although there will still be that cold wind coming in from the North Sea. Highest temperatures down to the southwest could get up to 25 degrees come Thursday afternoon. But down to the southwest, as well as the winds picking up, the cloud increasing, and look at this.